Good morning.
When I heard former chairman, I thought maybe there's a news release I didn't read this morning.
I was introduced the other day as a media observer now.
Well, you watch TV?
Yeah, so I feel like we all are.
Well, there's been lots to watch lately, but for those who aren't completely familiar with your career, and there might be one or two in the room, you've had an amazing career so far. It could cool off after this interview today.
It's all riding on the next 20 minutes.
But you're an award-winning producer, journalist, author. It seems to me, as I look over your career and seen all the things that you've done, and been a fan of yours of a long time now, Chris developed, as you heard in the announcement, that he was the CEO and chairman of CNN Worldwide, which is probably the most resourced news organization on the planet.
Without question, yeah.
You also took a show called The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, which was not a hit right out of the gate. And you were asked to take over the show, and you did, and turned the show around, made it the huge success that it's been. You created a CBS This Morning by putting an unlikely pair together, in Gayle King and Charlie Rose, and a couple of people scratched their head when you came up with that idea, but boy, did it work.
Weren't a lot of focus groups that pointed to it.
And of course, the Morning Joe show, which has been a long-running success for MSNBC. So you're responsible, I think, Chris, for shaping so much of how we look at the world today. And you're still early in your career, but I wonder what my job is as a parent, as a grandparent, as a business person, is to try and anticipate how things are changing and where they're likely to go next. And it seems to me, Chris, that what we saw on Friday night on Netflix, and Shelley Palmer was with us last night, and he had on his blog yesterday talked about the fact that streaming isn't coming, it's here. So what did we learn by that fight, or what looked like a fight, on Friday night? What did we learn about where media is going?
I think that we learned that people still have a sense of wanting to be part of a community. And if you think about it, I would not place myself or even my wife or my 13-year-old in the category of boxing fans. I think my 13-year-old liked Tyson because of The Hangover. But
and he wants to get that tat.
Yeah, really. But we all coalesced around the television.
Yep.
And so that's not anything different than when we as a society coalesced around the radio or coalesced around the television, but now we're coalescing around streaming. And I think that's very informative as to predicting the future, which is some things will not change, but how we view them are changing, have changed. When it comes to big events, whether it's the NFL or whether it's boxing, people will go where it is. I think it's not as important that it happened to be on a streamer. But they had technical problems that they're going to have to work through, particularly with the NFL coming. Yep. But they'll figure that out. Just like when you used to watch, before cable, and your rabbit ears may not have gotten the best reception. This will.
I tried to put aluminum foil on my Netflix connection. It didn't work.
Didn't work. But and look, there was one of the streaming platforms got involved on election night. With Brian Williams and Amazon.
That was really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. That's and again, it's sort of testing the notion of, do you have to have a massive infrastructure around a news organization that has to serve a population for 24/7, or can you just pick the 5 or 6 huge things that people are going to be interested in, and broadcast those or stream those?
So look out for us. You know how to make something that's watchable. You know how to create something that has great community following in the shows that you've turned around, produced, invented. What happens? So can a place like CNN afford to have the infrastructure it has if they're not going to get that high demand, or there's only a demand for certain stories at certain hours? That's a big infrastructure.
It's a great question, because I'm bullish in general on society's hunger for news and information. I think if we're talking about can you continue to spend at the rate that you are with a declining revenue of the subscription model.
Still makes a lot of money.
It does, but you're a businessman. You have to look not this year or next year, but in 5 years. So I happen to think the business people and the money will find a way to get to where the audience is. That could be in rolling up different disparate operations that have built communities already. I don't think we quite know how, but we know that there is a thirst for actual information, and there's a thirst for engaging with different kinds of ideas. So someone will find a way to monetize that. I think I know there are people out there actively working on that. But if you're asking me, can a major news organization, whether it's CNN or anyone else, afford the same level of spending and infrastructure without changing the business model? Absolutely not. And you're seeing that right now where people are cutting back on what they spend. Unfortunately, getting truth and getting news and information is really expensive. Talking about it is really cheap.
Yeah.
So you've got to be, from a larger standpoint of what's best for this world and what's best for this country, you've got to be investing in getting information as well. I happen to think, and you didn't ask me this, but I'll tell you anyway, I happen to think that truth and trust and actual information will become a commodity. It'll become a scarcity. And there are people that make business decisions or people that make governmental decisions based upon something being actually true. And that could be a source of revenue of people who pay for that. A Bloomberg terminal for truth. Yep. I think you guys have talked a lot about AI. But AI needs to have actual truth going into that so that it's garbage. It's not garbage in and garbage out. So there'll be a market for truth and information that's very separate from, commentary.
You caused me to think when you said a Bloomberg terminal for truth. Isn't that where the Bloomberg organization is going now? They're firewall protected. They invest a lot in gathering news information, starting in business, but now not just. Aren't they the bellwether of where we're going?
They're one of the organization that does a very good job of it and manages to stay away from sort of the, you're leaning this way or leaning that way. Yeah. But I think it'll become even more intense.
The journey of your life is one that's had no rough spots in it at all. It's just been smooth sailing.
It's been great, yeah, up until like a year and a half ago.
Except that you wrote a book back after a 2010 experience with a really warm and loving title of What I Learned When I Almost Died. Tell us about that.
I had I guess about 14 years ago, had a massive brain hemorrhage. Out of the blue. It did happen after an argument with Joe Scarborough. These are just facts. The doctors...
Joe and Mika, who were on their way to Mar-a-Lago.
These are just facts, and I have not... the doctor said no. It was completely unpredictable. There was nothing caused it. But I've not let Joe know that, so he has walked around with the guilt that he almost killed me. But yeah, I ended up in the hospital down in Washington D.C. The book was written because when I sent an email to Joe and Mika saying, "Hey, I'm not going to be at the next thing that we're going to go to because I'm at the hospital," they called the only person they knew who had experience in this kinds of things, Joe Biden, who was the vice president at the time. And Joe Biden got very involved and got me a great doctor. And so it's a really fun story. But the reason I wrote the book is you reevaluate just about everything when you're laying in that hospital room. And you start to realize that if there's anything not in your brain at that moment, then it's probably not worth having in your brain. And that promotes remarkable clarity, and that has served me well from that moment on.
It sure must change the way you think about everything. And but you got back on a horse. You got back into that crazy career in media. but you decided you were going to do some other things, and you had an interest in flying, and you pursued that. And I love the story of while you were learning, you decided maybe you take your son along on a little trip.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's always been one of those things where you go, yeah, I'd like to be a pilot. That seems cool.
Yeah.
If I wasn't in TV, I think I'd be a pilot. I think it has something to do with control, but whatever. But so now I found myself with some time, and I don't have a hobby. I really didn't have a hobby. So I'm like, this seems like a cool hobby.
Your hobby was work.
Yeah. And so I picked it up, started learning, and got to a point where my flight instructor said, plan a trip across the country. And I said to I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I said to my 13-year-old, what do you want to see in the country? And he, got on the computer and picked a bunch of places he wanted to see in the country. And to my wife's like, okay, that sounds great. The three of us took off in a Cirrus four-seater and left from New Jersey and flew across the country to Santa Monica and up to Seattle.
So you're still not licensed. This is still in your training
I
phase.
passed my written last week,
Yep.
so I'm pretty close.
No, when you made the trip.
Oh no,
Yeah.
no license. We stopped at 110 airports
In how long?
Over 8 days, and saw the St. Louis Arch and Grand Canyon and Sedona and Catalina and Mount Rushmore, and actually got out and went to some of these places and actually saw the country. And it was very interesting. My son had an experience in Oklahoma with a 75-year-old guy who owns a machine shop, long story about how we ended up at his machine shop, and got a lesson in how to make wealth from this gentleman. And he said, Dad,
Come on, share this with us.
he said, Dad, people are nice. Because he's only known like New York. So I go, yeah, people are nice. He goes, I think we should move to Oklahoma.
So Jenny, when are you moving?
Yeah, I don't know that we'll be buying real estate in Ada, Oklahoma, which is where we were, but it was an opportunity to kind of see the country and spend 68 to 70 hours with him in a small little airplane.
I had a very similar experience growing up. My father took me once to a bowl game.
That sounds about the same. But no, I have the luxury of some time, right? Because that's how these things work. You get the crap beaten out of you, and if it doesn't work out, you have a little bit of time. And I've decided that it's very important that at the end of this time, of which I still have a fair amount, how am I different? How am I better? How am I a better husband, better father? Am I a better business person?
Are you?
You'll have to ask Jenny about those things. She's like, my kids right now are like, so how's the job search coming? Like, because Jenny's like, oh wow, you have
You're
parenting
around
thoughts.
here a little
That's
too
great. Well, welcome. But I think when you and I spoke, I told you I have taken finding out what's happening in this business, whether it's entertainment or news, as a job. Mm-hmm. And I've met with almost 280 people.
It's amazing.
And that is a full-time job, and it's remarkable when you're not looking for a job, and you're not talking, because these are meetings where I genuinely want to hear what's going on. You learn a lot.
Yeah.
Like if you shut up and listen, you do learn a lot, but you do get a much bigger. You almost, in a utopian society, you'd want to give leaders 6 months to go do this, because there's so much that's happening out in the world, like very interesting, cool people doing amazing things. I mean, I would have never met you had I been, still in the 24/7
Boy, do I
world.
wish you had a job.
And then you meet these people and their ideas, and you see where the future is going. But when you are in these very intense jobs, you barely have time to do anything.
So let's end on that note, Chris. With the 280 meetings that you've taken so far, the first thing that comes to mind was wow.
Technology is much further along. That's going to further democratize viewing. I through all these conversations, I probably advise a half dozen companies now. And one of them, they have built a virtual control room that can take 25 live inputs and completely change the way that YouTube creators, Instagram, TikTok interact with their followers. And I think that technology, coupled with the fact that but more now than ever, there's an ability to have a relationship and build a community of followers or like-minded people. I think that there's going to be this convergence of the technology, the communities that will then roll up, and then I believe will become the next mass media. And I don't know that it's going to be a reinvention of the current world. I think it's the best example I can use is anyone that lived in San Francisco in 2002, 2003. If you ever tried to get a taxi, it was a horrible experience. You would call this number, it'd be busy. Some people at the back number, and you could maybe get an answer there. And then this horrible car may or may not show up, and they were like, screw you, you're lucky we were picking you up.
Yeah.
That was literally, and then all of a sudden, Uber comes along. And so this massive disruption that completely changed, starting in San Francisco, the ability to get a ride somewhere, did not come from the taxi companies going, I think we can make it easier for people.
It never
right?
comes from the
It came from this industry disrupting force, and I think that probably is what's going to happen.
Well, I suspect that the next big changes in media, you'll be right at the center of it because you're a talent, and I know you're in hot demand, and I'm so glad you shared some time with us this morning.
I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Chris Licht.